It's nice to see you again, Congressman. So I misspoke a little bit before the break. Just wanted to make clear, you are the only Republican congressman serving on the Congressional Oversight Commission for the Exchange Stabilization Fund. So that's not specifically PPP, it's for Treasury and Federal Reserve, which is also giving, obviously, a lot of stimulus into the economy. There's been a lot of talk about oversight of PPP, of the various stimulus monies, and a lot of talk about transparency, revealing the names, for example, of the businesses that have received the PPP funding. Overall, do you think that that this stimulus process has been transparent enough?
Well, Julie, it's good to be back with you, and I'm pleased to serve on the Oversight Commission for House Republicans with my colleague Donna Shalala from Florida and Pat Toomey of Pennsylvania representing Senate Republicans. It's important work, and I think transparency is key. Secretary Mnuchin and the Fed Chairman, Jay Powell, have both told us that they're committed to transparency. The Act calls for transparency. And so I expect in these exchange stabilization funded facilities that they will be transparent.
What is it we would learn, though? Let's say we get the names of every company who got this money. What recourse is there if somebody got funds who potentially should not have?
Well, in the ESF, it's not moving that fast. You know, this is being very prudent, very deliberate on the part of Fed and Treasury. And I think you'll see that because of that and using the banking system, that they're being very careful about that. In the PPP example, where you had millions of borrowers having access to the PPP funds in a very short period of time, that was inevitable that you might have some people that were not perfectly qualified. And so as you've seen, the Treasury's asked them to claw some of those funds back. They've put additional disclosure guidance on PPP. And I was public in my comments last week that the 7A program for the SBA, unless those borrowers were promised something else, which I don't believe they were, that we should follow the disclosure standards in the SBA 7A program.
Representative, just taking a look at the PPP program and what it's done for Arkansas specifically, you spoke recently in an op-ed about more than 40,000 small businesses receiving more than $3 billion in these funds. And I'm just wondering whether you think the PPP program as it stands now has actually gone far enough, both in the funds that's allocated and these actual distributions to individual companies to achieve what it's set out to do and keep people on payrolls, especially looking at the unemployment insurance claims report that we got out today with another more than 1.5 million new claims for last week.
Right, it's a good question. I think the PPP program is probably one of the most successful aspects of the CARES Act, along with the pandemic unemployment compensation and the tax rebate checks. I think it did get money out in the economy. It got it out into the economy quickly. And I don't doubt those 40,000 businesses aren't better off in keeping people employed here in Arkansas and keeping their operations together as the virus swept across the state. We're now reopening here in Arkansas, and I think that money will have been essential. As to should we continue it, there's over $100 billion left authorized and appropriated by Congress in the Paycheck Protection Program that has not been applied for. The due date, as you know, in CARES was to apply by June 30th. So I, for one, would be supportive of extending the opportunity for PPP beyond June 30th, not necessarily appropriate more money, but make that existing appropriation available to new small businesses who did okay, maybe in April and May, but might need access to the funds actually in July and August as they try to get open at a faster rate.
And Congressman, to pick up on that idea, what about not just the PPP, but the other stimulus, the stimulus checks that individuals were receiving? Because as we get sort of past reopening towards fall, potentially facing a second wave, do you think that Congress will really need to remain focused on finding creative solutions for stimulus a little bit further out?
Well, Julie, it's a good question, and we don't really know how fast the economy will reopen. The statistics are actually very encouraging, as you've seen on retail sales and the jobs created in May. We did have that claims report this morning that was showing that it's coming down, but still at a troubling level. So I think Congress has to be flexible. The real issue should be how to phase it in and phase it out. But I think Congress has to be flexible as we look at the next few months without predicting a second wave or not. We know some aspects of the economy will open slower than others, and we know some geographic areas will be harder hit than others. So I'm encouraged actually by the travel statistics and the business statistics that I'm seeing, including that the Chamber survey shows that 80% of small businesses are now reopened. That bottomed out, I think, in late April at about 50% were closed.
Representative, I'm going to assume that you and members of Congress do have concerns about what the Fed is doing with Treasury funds to backstop losses as it goes into bond buying programs, corporate that it's never done before. Do you have concerns that there could be real setbacks with what the Fed's about to do?
Well, the most important thing the Fed has done to date was stabilize liquidity and the functioning of markets back in the middle of March. And you saw both the high grade bond market and the high yield bond market both respond positively with shrinking spreads and over $1 trillion of bonds conventionally issued. So the Fed actually in the primary corporate bond market and in their secondary corporate bond market have really not done anything measurable and material except say that they're available. This small amount of ETFs that they've bought in the last 2 or 3 weeks, Jay Powell told Congress yesterday that he felt like that would phase out and that they would be monitoring the corporate bond market more directly to see if it had liquidity dislocations. But I think actually the market's improved dramatically since mid-March.
Congressman, finally, I want to ask you about President Trump. We have seen these new revelations come out in this book by John Bolton. We have seen what many have characterized as mishandling of the Black Lives Matter protests around the country. And we have seen maybe not a huge number, but an increasing uptick in the number of Republicans who say they are not going to support President Trump for re-election. I'm wondering where you stand on this issue.
Well, on the subject of John Bolton's book, I've just seen the headline, Julie. I haven't seen the assertions in it. Many people leave administrations and make money writing kiss and tell books. It seems Ambassador Bolton's going to join that group. And, if the comment is President Trump's approach to White House governing is entrepreneurial and a bit haphazard, I don't think we need a new book to tell us that as it relates particularly to foreign policy over the last 3 years. So President Trump has done some good things as it relates to economic policy and getting America on the right track with regard to religious freedom. And I can go through a long issue of positive things, but tone in our country is important. And we need a positive tone from our president at the top of our country to reflect the views of America. And that includes healing and reconciliation and recognition that everyone is deserving of equal justice under the law. And I thought some of the things he said at West Point, the things he said when he went down to Florida for SpaceX were the kind of tone and constructive view that I expect out of our president. And I commend him for that tone. I want him to keep it up.
All right. Well, keep your eyes off his Twitter feed then, Congressman French Hill of Arkansas. Thank you so much, sir, for
Thank you so much.